In a desperate bid for survival, 78-year-old grandmother, Elena, stumbled through the knee-deep snow, her eyes fixed on the faint light of her cabin in the distance. The blizzard raged on, reducing visibility to near zero. A wolf cub, its fur matted with ice, clung to her chest, its tiny heart beating rapidly against her body. The howling wind and creaking trees filled the air, as Elena's numb fingers gripped the cub tighter, her mind racing with the thought of reaching the safety of her cabin. The temperature had plummeted to -71 degrees Celsius, and she knew that frostbite was just minutes away. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on the cabin, her only hope for survival. Elena lived a simple life in her coastal cabin, nestled between the frozen tundra and the icy coastline of Arctic Alaska. She spent her days fishing, gathering firewood, and tending to her small garden. The isolation suited her, and she had grown accustomed to the harsh yet beautiful landscape. The cabin was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the harsh realities of the outside world. Elena had lived here for over a decade, and had grown to love the simplicity and peace that came with it. She spent her evenings reading, writing, and watching the stars twinkle to life in the night sky. The days were short, and the nights were long, but Elena had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the Arctic landscape. She knew when to expect the aurora borealis, and when to prepare for the harshest of storms. The blizzard that was brewing on the horizon, however, was unlike any she had seen before. The wind was picking up, and the snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes that obscured her view. Elena knew that she had to prepare for the worst, and so she set about securing the cabin, boarding up the windows and reinforcing the door. As she was finishing up the preparations, Elena heard a faint cry, carried on the wind. At first, she thought it was just the howling of the storm, but then she heard it again, louder and more insistent. She turned to face the sound, and that was when she saw it, a small, injured wolf cub, cowering in the snow. Elena's heart went out to the cub, and she knew that she had to act fast. She quickly scooped up the cub, cradling it in her arms, and began to make her way back to the cabin. The wind and snow were intense, but she pushed on, determined to save the cub's life. As she reached the cabin, Elena quickly opened the door, and stepped inside, slamming it shut behind her. She was exhausted, but she knew that she had to tend to the cub's wounds. She quickly set about making a fire, and preparing a warm bath for the cub. The cub's eyes flickered open, and it let out a small whimper. Elena smiled, relieved that the cub was going to be okay. She continued to tend to its wounds, speaking softly to calm it down. As the night wore on, the storm raged outside, threatening to engulf the cabin. Elena knew that she had to keep the fire burning and the cabin warm if she was going to keep the cub alive. She set about gathering more firewood and tending to the fire. The hours passed slowly, with Elena checking on the cub regularly and making sure that the fire was burning brightly. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Elena knew that she had to be prepared for the worst. As the night wore on, Elena began to feel the effects of the cold and the lack of sleep. She knew that she had to stay awake and keep the fire burning if she was going to keep the cub alive. She set about making a warm tea and trying to stay alert. The hours ticked by, with Elena struggling to stay awake. The storm raged on outside, and the cabin creaked and groaned under the pressure. Elena knew that she had to keep the cub safe, and so she continued to tend to it, despite her own exhaustion. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, Elena knew that she had to get the cub to safety. The storm was showing no signs of letting up, and she knew that she had to act fast. She quickly gathered her gear and prepared to set out into the unknown. As she stepped out into the storm, Elena was hit with a blast of icy air. The wind was intense, and the snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes that obscured her view. She stumbled forward, the cub clutched to her chest, and the storm raging around her. The storm was intense, with the wind howling and the snow falling in thick, heavy flakes. Elena stumbled forward, the cub clutched to her chest, and her eyes fixed on the horizon. She knew that she had to keep moving, if she was going to find safety. As she walked, Elena began to feel the effects of the cold and the lack of sleep. She knew that she had to keep moving, if she was going to find safety. She set about finding shelter and trying to start a fire. The hours ticked by, with Elena struggling to find shelter and start a fire. The storm raged on, and the cold began to seep into her bones. She knew that she had to keep the cub safe, and so she continued to try and find shelter. As she stumbled through the snow, Elena saw a figure in the distance. At first, she thought it was just a tree or a rock, but as she got closer, she realized that it was a person. They were dressed in a thick parka, and their face was obscured by a mask. Elena's heart began to pound, as she realized that the figure was approaching her. She didn't know if they were friend or foe, and she knew that she had to be careful. She slowly backed away, the cub clutched to her chest, and her eyes fixed on the figure. As the figure got closer, Elena saw that it was a woman, dressed in a thick parka, and carrying a backpack. The woman's face was obscured by a mask, but Elena could see the kindness in her eyes. She slowly approached Elena, and began to speak in a soft, gentle voice. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Maria, a scientist who had been studying the effects of climate change on the local wildlife. She had been tracking the wolf cub, and had been searching for it for hours. Elena was relieved to have found help, and she gratefully accepted Dr. Maria's offer of assistance. Together, Elena and Dr. Maria set about finding shelter and starting a fire. The storm raged on, but they worked together, using their combined skills to survive. As they worked, Elena began to feel a sense of hope, and she knew that she had found a true friend in Dr. Maria. As the night wore on, Elena and Dr. Maria huddled together, trying to stay warm. The storm raged on, but they knew that they had to keep the wolf cub safe. They took turns keeping watch, and making sure that the fire stayed burning. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, Elena and Dr. Maria knew that they had to get the wolf cub to safety. They set about packing up their gear, and preparing to set out into the unknown. As they set out, Elena and Dr. Maria knew that they had to be careful. The storm was still raging, and they didn't know what dangers lay ahead. But they were determined to get the wolf cub to safety, and they pressed on, undaunted. As they walked, the storm began to subside, and the sun began to shine through the clouds. Elena and Dr. Maria looked up, and saw a rescue helicopter hovering above them. They waved their arms, and shouted for help, and the helicopter began to descend. As the helicopter landed, Elena and Dr. Maria rushed to get the wolf cub on board. But just as they were about to lift off, a massive avalanche came crashing down the mountain, threatening to engulf them. Elena and Dr. Maria looked at each other in horror, as the avalanche bore down on them. They knew that they had to act fast, if they were going to survive. They grabbed the wolf cub, and ran towards the helicopter, but it was too late. The avalanche engulfed them, and Elena felt herself being swept away. She lost consciousness, and everything went black. When Elena came to, she was lying in a hospital bed, with Dr. Maria sitting beside her. The wolf cub was lying in a small bed, next to her, and it was looking up at her with big, round eyes. Elena smiled, relieved to see that the wolf cub was safe. She looked up at Dr. Maria, and saw the concern etched on her face. She knew that she had been through a traumatic experience, and she was grateful to have made it out alive. As Elena recovered, she realized that she had learned a valuable lesson. She had learned that even in the most desperate of situations, there was always hope. and she had learned that she was capable of overcoming even the most daunting challenges. Elena smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that she would never forget her experience in the Siberian wilderness, and she was grateful for the lessons she had learned. As Elena was about to leave the hospital, she received a surprise visit from a representative of a local conservation organization. They told her that the wolf cub she had saved was part of a critically endangered species, and that her actions had helped to ensure the survival of the species. Elena was amazed, and felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had never imagined that her actions would have such a significant impact. The representative thanked Elena for her bravery and selflessness, and told her that she would always be remembered as a hero to the conservation community. Elena smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment and purpose. She knew that she had made a difference, and that she would always be proud of what she had accomplished. The truth is, you don't need to live in Siberia to face an emergency. Power outages, storms, supply chain disruptions, they can happen anywhere. The resource in the description below will show you exactly how to prepare. It could make all the difference for your family.